A review is always necessarily filtered through a reviewer's subjective frame, and while I wouldn't normally inject myself in this way, I feel like some disclosure is necessary to help to understand how this game refracts through my particular lens, and therefore how it might end up being a different experience for you. I was born and grew up in the Middle East on a tiny island called Bahrain, but then went to boarding school in England where I picked up this accent, and eventually graduated from university in London. Having spent a good amount of time there, I'd like to think I understand the quirks and hallmarks of British comedy. That is, the abundant sexual innuendo, the frequent self-deprecation, sharp tongue-in-cheek wit, and the heavyweight sarcasm delivered with the dryness of an overcooked Sunday roast. An appreciation of British humour is not necessary, but highly recommended when playing Thank Goodness You're Here. It takes place in a typical small English town. Through the use of throwback vintage footage of very English things like red double-decker buses and terraced housing, it does a great job of quickly conjuring a very specific English time and place. And that is Barnsworth, an imaginary working-class mining town somewhere in the north of England. The opening song, a 50s tune about a man showing off his ginormous prize marrow to women, perfectly sets the tone for the rest of the game. As it begins, you're sent by your boss to Barnsworth, and before you know it, everyone is greeting you with the line, "Thank goodness you're here," as they attempt to offload their chores onto you. When I worked in video games, around the time that the first Wii console was doing really well, we got a visit from one of the important people over at Nintendo, who disclosed to us that the secret sauce of making video games was to include elements that provoked both surprise and delight in players. Since then, I've repeatedly heard this concept bandied about in other creative contexts. I'm not sure how useful it is, but I can tell you, this game has it in metric tons. Over the entire duration of the game, I was consistently both surprised and delighted. Around every corner there's some bonkers novelty thrown at you, and it never allows you to become complacent or bored. And what more can you ask of a game, really? Thank Goodness You're Here perfectly illustrates the notion that constraints are one of the most powerful tools in game design. Take, for example, the control scheme, which consists entirely of pause to run around, space to jump, and enter to hit things. That is, the only way to interact with anything or anyone in the game is to slap them. Hence the game builds itself as a slapformer. This is a simple concept, but it results in a wonderful serendipity effect, where you're never sure what the result of hitting something will be. Often, things deform satisfyingly. Sometimes someone will talk to you. Other times they'll just make a pained utterance. Walking around just wailing on things to see what happens, or just for fun, was surprisingly satisfying and never really grew old. The game has an irreverent playfulness that works so well. It's kind of like a mischievous kid making poop and fart jokes all the time, but it's actually funny, and infectiously so. I love, for instance, the way it throws all the rules of physics out the window, playing fast and loose in the best creative way possible with scale, perspective and gravity, like they don't matter one bit. With a bright, widely colourful palette outlined in single black strokes, the game has a great lo-fi comic book visual aesthetic. Character design is inventive too. The townsfolk are all disproportioned, and your player character is some kind of Simpsons yellow, prematurely balding, and for some reason hilariously diminutive in comparison to everyone else. Environments are packed, full of rewarding visual detail. Just walking into stores and reading all of the funny, nonsensical signs took up a large part of my playtime. An interesting design element is the inclusion of some very light navigation-based puzzling. You'll have to find things or people to progress, and the game has an interesting way of going about this. Its pathways through the town are all one way, and form a big loop, so you can only go in one general direction, and never backwards. This means you'll have to revisit people you met earlier by completing the loop again. I'm making it sound more frustrating than it actually is. The first time you complete the loop, you'll be lost amid all the novelty, but then it gradually clarifies that you need to make your way to specific destinations to complete game objectives. And each time you make a loop, things progress. Characters move around and do different things, which keeps the mood fresh. In fact, one of my favourite scenes was a recurring bit involving the protagonist falling through a chimney and dirtying a man's living room, and this is only possible through the interesting navigation loop they have in the game. There is no real challenge to speak of. The platforming exists as an interesting and often funny way to get around. Goals can be completed almost accidentally, but just being in Barnsworth, listening and talking to people, and observing the surreal tapestry unfold is hugely entertaining. If I'm going to say anything bad about the game, it's that I sometimes felt lost. not really clear on what my current goal was or where I needed to be going. Thankfully, the game puts up enough guardrails that you won't find yourself aimlessly wandering around for very long. One of the best things about England is the wealth of amazing accents there are in such a small space of land. There's some fabulous local accents and dialects on display here, including the instantly recognisable talent of prolific actor Matt Berry, who you may know from What We Do in the Shadows.
Oh, thank goodness you're here. I've been sucking this pipe all morning. I haven't got a drop out of it.
Thank Goodness You're Here pulls off comedy really well. The obvious touchstone here is Monty Python. The humour seesaws wildly between the trivial lines of Barnsworth's residents and absolutely absurd situations, and it's this unexpected juxtaposition of the mundane and the surreal that is at the heart of what makes this game so funny. One minute you're going to fetch some milk, the next you're sharing a hot tub with a cow. And having explained the mechanics of the comedy in this game, I've made it about 30% less funny. Apologies. It's fairly commonly understood that if being sexually repressed was an Olympic sport, the British would win all the medals. It follows then that a large part of the British comedy repertoire revolves around sexual innuendo, that fine art of obliquely referring to sex through sly double entendres, accompanied with emphatic nods, nudges, and winks. And if I'm being honest, there's nothing I enjoy more than tea, biscuits, and a good risque pun. And this game is delightfully loaded with them.
I've never seen a hole as big as that before. My wife could learn a thing or two.
Now I will warn you that the degree to which you find this game funny will depend almost entirely on how much tolerance you have for silly British humour. Let's just say that if you know the airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow, then you'll probably appreciate all of the comedy on offer here. Something that is discussed in the context of video games is how they generally suck at executing comedy. One of the main arguments goes that comedy is often about timing, and when the player is in control of everything, jokes can fall flat pretty quickly. I would argue that we're well beyond the point where we can talk meaningfully about video games as a monolith. We don't just talk about how all movies are good at some things and bad at others. There's so much nuance in between all the various types and genres of movies that it would sound dumb to discuss them in this way. And I think the same is true for video games. Sure, comedy in first-person shooters tends to be more difficult to pull off, and while not unheard of, it is more rarely encountered. However, I think there are lots of examples of games that pull off humour really well, so I feel like the video games and comedy argument is mostly outdated. Anyway, let me know in the comments what video games you've played that you found hilarious. Thank Goodness You're Here is a short game, clocking in at about 3 inventive, joyful hours, and it culminates in probably the best musical minigame in video game history.
Think it's still Ethel Brock. Help us fix our ticky-tack.
It's created by indie devs Cold Supper and published by Panic. At the time of this review, its full price was $19.99, or 10 bob. I think it's very unique, probably unlike anything you've played, and as such, well worth picking up, especially if you like having your expectations comically subverted. But there's a chance that if you're not into British culture and comedy, then you might instead simply walk away wondering what the hell did I just play? Or, much worse, thinking, well, that was simply weird.